Hi, this is Peter Austin, director of the 1960s Project. We've got a little bit behind in posting to Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. But remember, these posts are just tips of the iceberg of a larger project we've got underway we're building out. Today, I wanted to make this video to connect some of the things happening now, urgent things in Afghanistan, which we'll talk about in a minute, with events during our period. And remember, the major push for what we do is to highlight what men and women what they achieved in 100 fields during the 1960s project, from geology to architecture to surgery, achieved during a time most people associate with rock and roll, Woodstock, troublesome, protesting, loud, kind of psychedelic stuff. Stuff which is kind of interesting, but not the whole story, not even close. And we view this typical psychedelic approach as really overdone. And more importantly, it's incomplete. And so we're trying to set the record straight. I guess what we're doing is kind of politically incorrect. There's a politically incorrect guide to the 60s. What we're doing is not politically correct or incorrect. As investigators, historians, and researchers, we're trying to be as accurate as possible. Well, one of the things we do in our work in the 1960s is to connect the period to things happening today, right now. And boy, do we have two connections in the news. One good that I want to look at in Tokyo, the other not so good in Afghanistan. And in the next 10 minutes, I'd like to talk about each of these. The first is the Tokyo Olympics. During the time we cover, which stretches a little bit into the 1970s, our period has 4 Summer Olympics. One in Rome, 1960, one in 1968 in Mexico City, 1972 in Munich, and the one I skipped over, 1964 in Tokyo. We were just in Tokyo together, sort of a few weeks ago, everybody by their television. Here's a good 2021 replay of Tokyo in 1964 on a grand and international scale. That year, 1964, the world was distracted by the Cold War, just as it's distracted by COVID today. And for Japan, though, in 1964, the games in Tokyo signaled that Japan was back from the brink of destruction, back from the defeat of World War II. In Japan, a miracle was a revival was happening that you guys all know about because you see the results. In Japan, we see a staggering economic growth, 10 to 13% per year, which inspired not only the Pacific region, but created the world's second biggest economy, and with a place just about the size of Montana. The second biggest economy up until just a few years ago, that was taken by China. In the years after the war, in the late 1940s, 50s, and 60s, Japan wrote a constitution with America's help, lashed itself together with bullet trains that zipped all around its 4 main islands, created a stock exchange, and by the way, started making world-class products we all know today, like Toyota, Honda, Mitsubishi, Yamaha, Canon, Sony. I probably missed a few, but the list goes on and on. Well, hosting the 64 Olympics was a sign of the emergence of Japan, a proud and ancient land with a new beginning. Records were broken in 1964, as they always are, and the United States did pretty well in swimming and track and field. Maybe my favorite participant was a young track star from Kansas named Jim Ryan, R-Y-U-N, who set the world record in the mile run at 3 minutes, 59 seconds. And the key was he was a junior in high school. No one thought a human being could run a sub 4-minute mile. They thought that was up to horses. Well, in 2021, we saw Tokyo shine again in the Olympic spotlight. And the Tokyo Games that we saw signaled the spirit of resolve and friendship to host a new set of games, even under the circumstances of this pesky virus. Well, in contrast to the 1960s, where Japan was emerging after the war, in 2021, Tokyo this time was trying to emerge from a recession that had plagued it since the early 1990s. In 2021, she was also in a different position in Asia than 1964. Japan was now in the shadow of a rising China, which was not a factor in the 1960s. The 2021 Games at Tokyo were full of achievement and drama, but they seem to stretch out across the decades, with Japan saying, hey, we're still here, world. We know big China gets a lot of attention, but we're Japan. We still matter and can serve as a good place for achievers. And the 2021 games came off pretty well, I'd say, from riflery to swimming, volleyball to track, with the Americans doing quite well. Better than in 1964 for medals, in fact. In 1964, the U.S. won the gold medal count, but came in second in overall medals. This went to the Soviet Union, number one. Remember the USSR? This 2021 Olympiad, we swept golds again and the overall medal count. And our rival this time was not the Soviet Union, but it was China. And in any case, in both 64 and 2021, the number 3 slot for golds was the proud host country of Japan. Pretty good, I'd say. So we have the Olympics, yep, connected to the 1960s, but another connection is one recently and grimly in the news: events in Afghanistan. This is the reason why I'm making this short video, and it's how I'll close today. There's a reason why the 1960s can't stop in 1969, not at all. Of course, they technically do in 1969, but the 1960s project stretches the decade into an era that goes into the 1970s because the spirit of the time doesn't exhaust itself until the scandals of Watergate with President Nixon in 1974. But also, for us now, the spirit of the 1960s doesn't end until the Vietnam War ends, which means the evacuation of the city of Saigon, South Vietnam, in April of 1975, which is key to what is going on today. These events, Watergate and Saigon, brought the era to a close, really. How we know that Vietnam stamped itself into the memories of Americans so vividly is how we're actually reacting to Afghanistan and comparing the terrible events happening there today, right now, comparing them to the events in Vietnam decades ago. Americans have almost an instinctive reaction to Afghanistan this week as another Saigon, another 1975, another American defeat, both seemingly avoidable and unnecessary, hence terribly frustrating. But what about this connection of Afghanistan to events of the 1960s era Saigon? The connections, in my opinion, are worth talking about. And a little history wouldn't hurt either, I'd say. History you may not know. And this is how we'll close the video. In January of 1973, we signed the Paris Peace Accords in Paris that ended the United States' participation in the Vietnam War. Negotiating on the American side was Henry Kissinger, who's still alive today and is a consultant in Washington, D.C. These accords set the stage not for a unified Vietnam, no. It set the stage for a peaceful country split in two, communist in the north, free in the south. And this split arrangement was not conjured up out of thin air or just wishful thinking. No, there were at least 2 other examples you know of this kind of thing, where a free country faced an unfree part. A free part of the country faced an unfree part. This was what we saw in Germany after World War II, with a free West Germany and a not free East Germany. Then we see it in Korea after 1953. Along the 38th parallel of latitude, we have South Korea, an Asian tiger, Hyundai, LG, and Samsung, and a North Korea, which can only be described as the closest thing the world today has as a country being in the Stone Age. So a split Vietnam was not wishful thinking, but an idea that worked in other countries. Why didn't this happen in Vietnam? This is where Saigon and the evacuation comes in, why it's remembered, why it's connected to Afghanistan. Well, the 1973 peace accords didn't just happen automatically. After the accords were signed, it took resources, time, and money to carry them out. Trouble. The year after the peace was signed, the scandals of the Watergate break-in jolted the nation. And that same year, 1974, was also an election year, and the Democrats won big majorities in Congress. So when the new president, Gerald Ford, who took over from the resigning Nixon, went to the new Congress his first year, there was trouble. It had to do with getting support for the Paris Peace Accords. In a dramatic speech, I have it on my desk here, he practically begged members for resources to South Vietnam to prevent the roof caving in on the capital city of Saigon and South Vietnam in general being infiltrated from the north. Several Democrats, many of them elected on an anti-war platform, actually walked out during the president's address. And the Democrats as a party refused to support the treaty and the South Vietnamese. With support of the treaty gone, Saigon fell. 2 weeks, in fact, after Ford's speech and his pleading for emergency aid, the United States mounted a military operation called Operation Frequent Wind for the city's evacuation. April 29th and 30th, 1975, with those famous rooftop photographs we all know. As the communist forces closed in on the South and the city of Saigon, including the American embassy, sortie after helicopter sortie, flew Americans and Vietnamese to aircraft carriers waiting offshore, then to safety in the States, round the clock for 2 days straight. After we left Vietnam for good, the communists set up re-education camps and suppressed opposition so severely that the use of the word genocide would not be inaccurate. Stateside, though, our successful, if harrowing, evacuation of Saigon began the big Vietnamese diaspora, bringing such wonderful people to America to become citizens today in cities like Los Angeles and Houston. Fast forward to today with Afghanistan and its capital city, Kabul now. The scene is again harried, even more so than in the Vietnamese case. Now, instead of communist North Vietnamese, we have Taliban. Many will study this, and the talking heads on TV will comment. But one surface difference here between Kabul and Saigon is that Congress in 1975 knew things would collapse without support. Yet members were willing to allow it to happen, almost joyous in the fact. Contrasted with Afghanistan today, Americans in Vietnam had time to react, time to plan and leave between 73 and 75, except for diplomatic personnel. And Operation Frequent Wind was specifically mounted in Vietnam to rescue loyal Vietnamese and our diplomatic people. By contrast, no conscientiousness, it seems, to exit intelligently in Afghanistan appears to be in place. Thousands of Americans are trapped by hostile forces, and shockingly, the Afghans are actually given priority, it seems, over Americans to escape a harrowing situation. Interestingly, both results appear with Democrats at the helm. This is not a partisan statement, you understand. I'm simply describing this as a historian, as a matter of record, don't you see? In 1975, it was Democrats in Congress. Now in Afghanistan, interestingly, it is a Democratic president who appears to be presiding over a terrible debacle of no planning Afghanistan now. And perhaps to their credit, his Democratic colleagues in 2021 appear to be surprised and displeased. The results to the world are similar, though. The optics, I mean. It is an American dilemma, not a partisan Republican-Democrat one. It's the optics of defeat, 1960s Saigon, twinned with the 2021 Kabul. Interestingly, Joe Biden overlaps both events. He's president now and was a junior senator from Delaware in 1975. He seems to make the link more vivid between a 1960s era that may seem remote and irrelevant to many, and the events unfolding in Afghanistan as you listen to me now. 1960s and today's Afghanistan are linked powerfully together in the person and office of the president, and for the lessons of history, and for the destiny of a great nation of the United States. So wow, people, Tokyo stretching across the years in sport, 1964 and 2021, with American athletes bringing home golden victory for all the world to see. And wow, just after the closing ceremonies, the unfortunate events in Afghanistan going the other way for the U.S. with all the world to see. And with the 1960s as a chain to bind them together, or at least get the conversation rolling. So that's it. Thanks for watching. If you like what you heard, got something out of it, share it with anyone who might like it. That's how we grow. And oh, I almost forgot. I'll send along on Instagram the Olympic medal totals for 1964 and 2021. Interesting to see how some things change and some things stay the same. Until next time, be well, stay strong.